the Baen Free Radio Hour.
Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour. It's a pleasure to have you along. I am Baen Associate Editor and your podcast host, David Afshirod. For July, we had 3 mass market reprints of hardcovers and trade paperbacks that had come out sometime last year. They were The Icarus Plot by Timothy Zahn, Trouble Walked In by Mike Coopery, and the anthology Robosoldiers, Thank You for Your Servos by Stephen Lawson, or edited by Stephen Lawson, I should say. We interviewed everybody associated with these books on the podcast back when they were first released in their hardcover or trade paperback formats, but thought we would give you a sort of greatest hits look at those interviews today. So if you happen to have missed them, or if you just didn't have a chance to pick up the books, hopefully this will pique your interest and you can give them a first look or a second look. So now we offer up Timothy Zahn about the Icarus Plot, Mike Coopery on Trouble Walked In, and Stephen Lawson and some of the contributors to Robosoldiers, Thank You for Your Servos.
So the Icarus Plot is the second book, like I mentioned, and the first book, The Icarus Hunt, focuses on Jordan McKay. I was just going McHale. I was going to say McHale, and I was like, no, it's McHale. And his crew, it's kind of a ragtag crew, as a whole bunch of other people are hunting them down. And we learn some things about them through that book. And then we get to this book, and this book focuses on Gregory Rourke and Celine, and not so much as a big crew this time. They're an operating pair. But then as the story progresses, we add characters into the mix. But I wanted to start out our conversation just kind of talking about, the general inspiration that you had for the series as a whole, and then kind of like what you enjoy doing about the series, because it's kind of it's similar in some aspects to what you write, but it's more but niche in that
perhaps.
It's more of a what's going to happen more than an action packed, like, battles and all this stuff. It's very kind of interesting, mental challenge to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, more of a mystery. Thriller is probably not the right word, but a mystery puzzle box. Who is doing what, what size everybody on, what's going on, all that sort of thing that hopefully will become very clear by the end.
Right.
With a few surprises along the way.
Yeah. So, we talked that the two protagonists in the books are different. What was your thought process there? And then when you went to create the new character of Gregory, what were you wanting to do that would make this book stand out differently than the first book? But Jordan's a really interesting character, and you learn a lot about him as you go through the book. And same thing here with Jordan too. By the way, I loved the my father used to say bits through the entire but I kept waiting for the penny to drop, and like his dad would come out and say, I never said that. I kept waiting for that to happen. So what was your inspiration for Gregory, and then also Celine too, because Celine is really interesting.
When I've been looking for a new plot for this universe for about 20 years, and finally got one. Pitched the proposal to my agent, and he said that 20 years later, it's going to be hard for people to jump back into this saga. But he suggested others of his clients with this same situation would set it in the same universe, but with new protagonists. So I decided to go that route. Gregory was going to be, he used to be a bounty hunter, so he's got those skills. But after a bad accident that you read about in the book, he and Celine became Crockett's instead. The trailblazers, they go.
I love that term.
Search. Yeah, they search unknown or unexplored planets, send bioprobes in to see what kind of little bit of biology, whether it's worth someone buying the planet and developing it. So they've gone to this much simpler, much safer sort of endeavor. Celine was I wanted her to just, the unique ability, the Cadolian people have this incredible sense of smell, can pick out somebody's scent after they've touched something days ago, and thought that would be a unique sort of thing, and also drive the plot, because that ability is what the other people in the book need. And so this is why they hire them. Only things are not quite what they seem, et cetera, et cetera. But then fold in some of the original characters from the book where it made sense to do that, and just went from there. It just as a side note, my son did the copy editing of this, and when he had finished reading, he said to me that he really wanted to meet Gregory's dad someday. I had not ever thought of having, as my father used to say, is kind of one of his catchphrases. It's similar to the old Banachek, old Polish proverb sort of thing, which he would then make up out of whole cloth.
Right, exactly.
And so I figure book 4 or 5, I'm going to have to bring his dad in.
Oh, you mentioned Celine and her unique abilities, and what I really enjoyed about those abilities is, sometimes especially with sci-fi books, but sometimes with fantasy, but a lot of times with sci-fi, you give aliens some really cool abilities, or you give the characters some cool abilities, and they're cool to watch. They're cool to see happen, but they don't a lot of times, really affect the plot or affect what the other characters are doing around them. And, Celine and Gregory kind of get underestimated in a lot of situations where her abilities, really people don't take them, like they understand what they are, but they don't take them into account the way they should. And I like the way that you use them consistently through the book. And then even having the Jerry character know that, but then like he knows it, but he doesn't say it, and he uses it against him. And when you're going through these stories, or especially with this, I mean, you have the Star Wars stuff, you have all those things where people know about that, but I think developing these new things and adding them into the plot, is that something you're wanting to develop these new things to add to this story? And was that those abilities, did they come before you started writing the story, or did they come like just as you were developing it?
Pretty much I had the idea of her being able to do this scent tracing and such, and of course that then went how the plot developed in my mind. But yeah, you're absolutely right that people can know something and not factor it into their thinking, their planning. It takes a while to reset your brain that way.
Mm-hmm.
Just recently started playing Upwards with people. I'm a Scrabble player.
Yeah.
But the game night Upwards, where you can add a letter on top of another one, I know the rule, but my brain is not trained yet to look at a word and see if I change this letter and this letter, I can make a new word. It's something that I know the rule, but I don't think it yet.
Exactly.
And I think that's a lot of what's in this book. That's the antagonists understand what she can do, but it doesn't factor into their planning as much as it should.
Right. One of the things that I really liked about the first book and enjoyed about the second book are the kind of twists and double twists, and characters conning everyone is not the right thing that's happened, but everybody seems to have their own little con game that they're running on everybody else. And it's interesting after reading the first book and then kind of not, when I went into the first book, I really didn't know what to expect. And so reading it and then having all that stuff happen, I was like, oh, that's really cool. And then going into the second book, I was like, oh, I'm looking for it this time because I want to see if I can see it. And it was interesting. Sometimes I was like, is that it? Is that? And then it turns out it wasn't. And then this other things that you'd see the ferrets, for instance, in different places. And you're like, I think I know what that is. But then you're like, surely that's not Ixal is not the only alien that's around in the area. So it was really cool to see, not overdone either, but just these little parts where the characters are seeing something and maybe they don't truly understand what they're seeing. But that's, as the reader, you're like, oh, I think I know what's happening here.
Yeah, and you don't want to do the same plot twist with each book.
Right.
So this one doesn't have that same kicker at the end, but it does have enough little twists and turns and reveals that it should be satisfying without, again, going over the same territory.
Sure. Is that something that you consciously wanted to do with these books, just to kind of keep people on their toes? Because I think you could very easily have done just a straightforward plot, but this kind of bounces back on itself, and there's a lot of other variables that get put into which kind of make it flip-flop on itself a couple of times before the realization happens for the reader and also for the characters themselves.
Yeah, I mean, that was the flavor of the first book of what's going on. Oh, I understand. Oh, wait, no, I guess I don't. And tying it all together at the end. A straightforward plot. What's the fun of that?
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah, this is that style of book. I tend to put a little bit of puzzle box into, I think, every book I do, just because it's fun, and the readers seem to enjoy it. But yeah, this type of the original Icarus Hunt was that kind, as you say, and I want all of the ones in the series to be that way as well. Different plot twist, different what is going on, and is it correct, or is there another layer underneath here I need to know about?
Hi, this is DJ Butler. I'm here with Mike Cooper to talk about his new novel, Trouble Walked In. It's out now in trade paper and all your favorite ebook formats, DRM free when you buy them at Baen.com, of course, as always. Mike Cooper, he started writing in high school. He didn't really get into it until college when he began writing fiction online. He never seriously considered trying to be a novelist, though, not until 2006. That's the year he met Larry Correia, a fellow you may have heard of. Larry liked a story Mike was writing on.
Dave?
Yes. Did you just freeze?
We had a connection. Apparently, yes, you froze up there, and it said, now it's saying my internet connection is unstable. How dare you? Your internet connection is unstable.
Okay, I'm going to start again. All right. Stabilizing your internet connection there. All right. Hello and welcome. This is DJ Butler. I'm here with the one and only Mike Coopery to talk about his new novel, Trouble Walked In, out now in trade paperback and all your favorite ebook formats, DRM free when you buy them at Baen.com, as always. Mike Coopery started writing in high school. He didn't really get into it until college when he began writing fiction online. He'd never seriously considered trying to be a novelist until 2006. This was the year he met a fellow you may have heard of, Larry Correia. Larry liked a story Mike was writing online and asked if he could jump in on it. That story ultimately became Dead Six, which I hope all of you listening have watched. And if you haven't, then you've got a lovely trilogy of Coopery / Korea fiction waiting for you. In addition to that trilogy, this is Mike's fourth solo novel with Baen Books. Mike joins us from the Midwest, where he lives with his wife, his dog Penny, and also birds. Mike Coopery, hey, welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour.
Hello, DJ. It's nice to see you.
It's good to see you. It's been too long, actually. Was it LibertyCon that I last? It's been like 2 years or more.
LibertyCon 2018 is the only time I met you in person, as far as I can recall.
I think that's probably right. That's the con where my suitcase didn't show up.
I just saw this 8-foot tall man in cargo shorts and a tricorn hat, and knew it had to be you.
That guy's a freak. Yeah.
I mean, it's LibertyCon, so not
right.
Comparatively, no.
Right. There's also Mona Lisa walking around in full military regalia with a katana. So, yeah. Well, fantastic. Well, let's talk a little bit about Trouble Walked In. I guess maybe a word about genre. This is interesting. This book, from a genre point of view, goes broadly science fiction, right? Broadly, it's easy science fiction, but it kind of goes and pokes into at least two, maybe more other genres. How do you see the genre of this book? What books is it like?
What books is it like? That I couldn't tell you. It's basically a detective story, but it's not just a detective story in space, as someone derisively asked. It's the science fiction elements are actually crucial to the story. So it's not just something that could happen on Earth, but it's on space just for the hell of it. So, and it involves a conspiracy about an ancient alien life form, which that is always a fascinating thing for me. So that is something I worked into several of my books now, and am continuing to work into books, just because it's it gives you almost boundless story writing material, really.
Yeah. So it's there's the PI story. It's a little kind of hard-boiled PI, and it's not really in space. He's on a non-Earth planet, but never leaves the planet. Right.
Yeah. There's no actual space involved.
Right. No actual space. It's also cyberpunk, right? And it's very okay. We have disagreement. Tell me
no, it's got cyberpunk elements in it. It's just the cyberpunk genre has gotten so broad anymore, and then and then they call any other subgenre that's got some weird hook to it, they call it that plus the word punk on the end. With cyberpunk, it made sense because it had the aesthetic of the punk rock movement from the 80s, where it was born.
Whereas steampunk is not very.
There's no punk rock in the Victorian era.
Yeah.
There's no punk rock in World War II for your diesel punk.
Yeah. It's God punk or any of the other stuff you hear.
Yeah. So it does have elements of cyberpunk in it. You have like some of the existing technology is like neural links where you could plug a computer into your brain to do things easier or faster. And there are side effects that are talked about in there, including crippling addiction, which I think would be a real problem.
Yep.
And it doesn't work for everybody either.
Yeah. Yeah. You've also got there is a sort of a punk and goth style and aesthetic element, right?
Yeah.
It's fairly prominent. More so in some characters than others. Maybe.
You see that more in the main character. His name is Ezekiel Novak. Mm-hmm. His assistant is named Lily, and she's kind of fits that archetype more. She has kind of a goth punk way of dressing. She used to hang out at a nightclub where that was the kind of the scene. It's not really Easy is his nickname, by the way. It's not really his scene. That's not his world, but it's hers. And that's one of the reasons she makes a great assistant, because she knows people and knows things about which he doesn't know. But I think that's pretty reflective of the real world. I mean, not the whole world doesn't have one aesthetic for a setting,
Sure. I think other elements that you might say, well, that's reflective of the real world, but also I think are very characteristically cyberpunk is you've got this clash between big sort of governing mega corporations, right? Corporations that are so big that they get something like government status or the ability to influence a government. and there's some Japanese aesthetic in there. I remember the 80s. I think you're old enough to remember the 80s too, when everyone thought Japan was going to rule the world.
I remember movies from the 80s.
Okay.
I was born in 1981, so I wasn't really what you call an 80s kid per se.
We were scared of Japan.
Oh yeah, they were gonna take over. That was
they were
going to
take over. We paid little attention to the fact that they weren't having babies yet. Eventually, we realized that was going to stop them.
And also, their economy almost collapsed. There was that too.
And their economy, they tanked the economy.
But I did put some Japanese elements. There's the
Yakuza.
Yeah, the Yakuza operate on the planet of Nova Columbia.
Yeah.
Countries on Earth still exist.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a PI story. It's got some cyberpunk stuff, and it's a first contact. It's not a first contact story. There have been contacts before, but it is a contact with an unknown alien entity story. Really, kind of ultimately, right? That's where this all ends up.
It's kind of a first contact scenario with the particular entity that the story revolves around. Humankind has already encountered other alien races and in fact fought a war with an alien race.
Yeah.
At one point, called the Ceph.
Yeah.
So the existence of aliens is not like a new thing, and the existence of the ancient, now extinct alien race they call the Antecessors, that's been known for a long time.
Yep. And so some of the first contact history prior to the story, it's not all buttercups and roses, right? So there's a war, but also there's at least some rumored disaster around discovering or alien contact or alien artifacts, right?
Yeah, the Antecessors had a technology that referred to in story as a vacuum energy engine. It's a 0-point energy, as it's also called. It's their way of just deriving energy from the fabric of the universe. Very, you can see where that'd be tempting, because it's, even if you have fusion power, you're talking unlimited energy anywhere at any time. So that'd be, if you could crack that, it'd change the world. Problem is that it's, they're like cavemen monkeying around with a hand grenade. They don't know how it works. And there was an incident at the Medusae Fossae colony on Mars that they think they were attempting to activate one of these, and it destroyed the colony and killed 100,000 colonists. So this stuff is pretty heavily regulated just because of the potential risk. So that does leave a window for unscrupulous actors to try to work it through it on the black market, though, get it behind the scenes, or to bribe government officials in and let them do what they want with it.
Right. Yeah. To jam the regulator and use that power to control it. So tell us more about Easy. Who is he? What's his background? What makes him tick? Why is he a PI?
Easy is a local. He was born on the planet of Nova Columbia. He's probably in his mid 40s or so. He was very much inspired by the writings of Raymond Chandler. I read some of his work to get a feel for the genre beforehand, and he's a good guy. Because one thing Raymond Chandler was always adamant about is that the detective is a hero. Later in film noir, you have like these very, very morally ambiguous characters and situations. Easy is not morally ambiguous. He has a very strong sense of right and wrong.
Yeah.
He always tries to do the right thing. He tries to be responsible. And sometimes it works in his favor, sometimes not, but he has his own moral code that's very important to him. Yeah. He's a veteran of the war with the Ceph. He fought on a planet called Harvest, where they had to basically a long, grueling campaign to retake this colony world from the aliens. He, I don't know if I ever got into it in the book, but he was in the mechanized infantry, which is like power armor in the setting. And he also did a job where he was doing technical escort for intelligence operatives as they went and collected and studied Ceph technology. And he made some contacts doing that also. But he brings kind of a, just a regular guy, working class point of view to the story. Something I think a lot of readers in my typical target audience will be able to identify with.
Yeah. Yeah. He's a good guy doing a job.
Yes.
Yeah.
He came into the agency because someone he served with in the war wanted to be a detective. And they said if they got through the war together, they'd come back and start the agency. So we did. Well, unfortunately, something happened to his comrade and it left, and the agency was bequeathed to him. And he maintains it. Well, number one, he turns out he's quite good at the job. And number two, out of a sense of loyalty to his friend.
Yep. Worth noting maybe that Easy carries a wheel gun. You're kind of a wheel gun fan yourself.
Yes, because I have taste and culture. I've made it a point that in every single work of fiction I write that has something, that has some version of modern firearms in it, somebody will carry a revolver.
Yep.
This isn't like a conventional revolver. When you reload it, he pushes a lever and the cylinder itself ejects and he replaces it with a new one, and they're disposable. It fires explosive tipped ammunition, but it's still a revolver. And it's kind of, there are a lot of revolvers in Cyberpunk, even in the Cyberpunk 2077 game, for all of its flaws, had several different revolver weapons in it. So it fits in the genre. Plus, there's a little bit of a Dirty Harry thing going on there too.
Yeah.
He's not quick to bring on violence. He doesn't like to use violence. In fact, it can get him in trouble. You can't just go around shooting people,
right.
But he's not afraid to do it when he has to. So there is some element of that too.
Yeah. And as you noted, there's a consistency with the existing Coopery aesthetic.
Yes. Part of the brand.
Yeah. I love it. So I like this point that he's not a noir PI, right? And this is something I think people I don't know, you get bogged down in discussions of genre, but people sometimes use, the idea of noir to just mean detective stories. That's really not it.
Yeah, film noir is it's a film technique.
Yep.
And, it got kind of conflated with detective stories, but detective stories probably predate noir film. Noir film came from France. I believe after the 1930s, I think, is when the genre was kind of born. And there's a lot of overlap, but they're not necessarily the same thing at all. The detective stories came from the pulps in the early 20th century. The pulps also, which birthed, science fiction and fantasy as genres, and westerns and romance and everything else, just about. And
and they had older antecedents too, right? Detective stories go back to Arthur Conan Doyle, and they go back to Edgar Allan Poe.
Yes.
And and noir, one of the basic ideas of noir is this protagonist who's on the edge and has he's already kind of 1 foot a lawbreaker, and then a bad woman seduces him, is classically, right?
There's some of that. And there's a lot of just noir film techniques too. It's not just filming something that's dreary and black and white. I'm not a particular fan of the genre. I haven't seen a lot of movies that could be described accurately as film noir. But when I concocted this story, I ended up settling on it to be kind of a detective story. So this is my first attempt at writing a detective story, so I hope it didn't come out to be crap.
I can assure you it did not come out to be crap.
I guess I'd just like to ask you each about what inspired your stories, if that's all right. So, Stephen, you did not contribute a story, but putting this together, what was your inspiration?
So second to last story, you'll actually find my name under it. It's called Nightingale. The idea for the anthology, actually, there's a subtitle on it that says, "Thank you for your servos." And I just get like weird wordplay in my head sometimes, and it turns into other ideas. I had this idea for like a novel about like this washed up, burned out combat veteran robot that's maybe missing some parts and some components from his combat time. He's been demilled, and some little girl adopts him, and they go save the world together on some mission to fight human trafficking or something like that. And I thought about the idea more, like I spent a couple days on it, and I'm like, you could put that title on a lot of things, and maybe it could be like an anthology by veterans about like combat robotics, and it just kind of evolved from there. I don't think this would have happened without Sean Hazlitt, because he's done a lot of groundwork on other anthologies and he's kind of coached me on this stuff. So I said, hey, Sean, how do you approach this kind of thing? He sent me a proposal template that I sent to Tony once I had it all filled out. And then I just really had to find authors to fill it in. I sought primarily veterans, but I had friends like Mona Lisa and Philip and Martin that are very smart on some other things like medicine and programming and things like that. So I think I rounded it out well with like 3 civilian contributors, and the rest are veterans. I asked them to write inside their MOSs or specialties or ratings, and they did that. And I think it's pretty well rounded out based on that concept.
And before I go to our other contributors, thank you for correcting me. Tell us a little bit about Nightingale.
So Nightingale is kind of a story that I wanted to write for a long time, and I had this idea of. My story that won the Jim Baen Memorial Short Story Award it's called Homunculus. It was published in 2018, and it's about this little teeny tiny robot that's piloted remotely, which is kind of far-fetched based on quantum entanglement used as communication. So I didn't go quite that far with the science fiction aspect of this. I have little AI-powered robots that are going to save a guy, but they're basically little teeny tiny commandos that can go enable self-rescue. So they've got equipment strapped to them, like guns and lockpicks and saws and things like that, and explosive charges, so they can go rescue this guy. The guy they're rescuing is actually their programmer and designer. He's also kind of a spy, and his wife has basically lured in this helicopter pilot, and she influences him in a number of ways and uses him to go rescue her husband. So that's basically the plot of the story for Nightingale. Nightingale is it's a reference that he gives her to Florence Nightingale because she's a flight surgeon. So she's a very resourceful woman. I'll just put it that way. The story has a lot of layers. Their last name is Moreau, so it's kind of an uplifting or uplift. I can't remember the term. For elevating another creature into kind of a human status. So they're kind of doing that with the artificial intelligence and giving them extra abilities that they wouldn't have otherwise. So there are layers to it. Nobody's going to get all of the layers, but there are a lot of them there.
Sean, tell us a little bit about Manchurian. Although, given your next Weird World anthology, I'm a little afraid to ask where this one goes.
So if you enjoy Russian prison tattoos, Chinese super geniuses, and CRISPR super viruses and rare earth metals, you'll enjoy Manchurian. So it's a novelette, and the idea originally came from a presentation at a conference called DEF CON 19, I think it was. And it was given by the chief medical officer. Yes, they have a chief medical officer at the Intel Corporation. And what he talked about was sort of some of the things that you can do with CRISPR weapons. And so I did some research, and it turns out that there's a specific gene that codes to the kind of the Han Chinese phenotype. So if you could literally today engineer a weapon that affected everyone in the world except 96 to 97% of folks with Han Chinese genes. So what the Chinese do is they unleash this virus through a proxy, which is a Pakistani scientist, because what the impact of the gene is, it targets your skin. So if your children go outside, their skin is burned essentially. So you've crippled much of the world from the sense of economic potential and things like that. So that's kind of how it starts. The main protagonist has a daughter who has this crippling illness. And, there's been several wars with China. Russia is fractured into several different nation states. And there's, a keen interest in a rare earth metal mine that the Russians actually are, been building for several years. At the same time, the world is kind of the Americans have gone all in on cybernetics, and the Chinese have gone all in on genetics. So it is a kind of a formulation or a projection of what that might look like in 2070.
Now, Philip, tell us about Operation Meltwater.
Yes, this was a really fun story to write, and I detailed a little bit of my process on my blog. And if you're interested in reading that, it's at pakramer.com. It was funny when I was asked to do this story or write a contribution. I went back and forth for a good 11 of the 12 months that I was given to write this thing. It was really the last month that I did all the writing. And a lot of that was because, I really wanted to, one, make this kind of reflective of some area of my specialty. Two, I wanted to try to be as original as I possibly could be, but I didn't. So like you were saying earlier, I'm not a member of the military, never have been. I didn't want to write from that point of view so much because I felt like I was the outsider. But it wasn't kind of the end of the road there for me because scientists have their role to play too in warfare. There's a lot of people making the tools by which war is made. So and there's been a lot of history of scientists with their tools, their inventions used for war when they really didn't want it to be. And so I thought, well, okay, I'll make my point of view from the scientists of the world. And so I chose kind of an older scientist who had this idea of sending a probe to Enceladus, one of the icy moons of Saturn, and he got this great NASA grant to work with his scientific instruments company and build this great device that would go to the moon. And yeah, he was really excited to go through all phases of this and build the prototype. And the story starts when they're out on the East Antarctic ice sheet and they're testing the prototype. And he's kind of saddled with a few NASA engineers there to help him, put the prototype through its paces. And it's not until he's there and running those tests that he realizes the NASA engineers aren't who they seem. They're actually members of, they're covert mission specialists. They're there to kind of take his technology and use it for, more nefarious purposes, I guess. And this is kind of a future where, I had to do a lot of background research on, the geopolitical landscape on this, but I did come across several articles that described, what Russia might do following the end of the Antarctic Treaty, which is set to expire in 2048. And some of those articles are like, well, they have all these icebreakers, they have all of these ice-capable vehicles. They're not going to retire those. They, especially with warming and stuff, and a lot of the Arctic ice melting, they might put that to use in Antarctica. And if they controlled both poles, then they would have really the mobility advantage in any war. So I went along with that. This is post 2048. Russia has kind of annexed the entire continent, and really the U.S. is doing everything that it can to get them off because they foresee war coming. And if Russia holds the poles, then that will not end well for the U.S. So yeah, it's really the scientists' effort to, not necessarily stop, but prevent the consequences of the military engineers from using his creation, his NASA probe, for really destructive means.
A different kind of Cold War. Mona Lisa, tell us about resilience.
So resilience came out of what was happening at the time that I was writing this with the pandemic going on. And since I had worked with clinical trials, one of the more interesting aspects of working with that was the difference between what a patient perceived that they needed versus what we as researchers would sometimes provide for them. It wasn't always lined up. So I started by writing about this woman who had some traumatic event happen to her, And the way that they were treating her was with a brain implant to help her with her PTSD. And this implant would manifest as an intelligent agent that would basically talk her down when she was having one of these episodes. And it's about the failure of that intelligent agent to do its job, because among other things, it was approaching it from kind of this touchy-feely, women helping women overcome things by talking them out or saying, oh, everything will be all right. That doesn't always work for people. Sometimes you need to do other things that are a little bit more active and kind of fight back, as it were, even if it's kind of a pretend fight back, in order to get the kind of closure that you need. So that's kind of what was the seed for this particular story.
And now we bring you our audiobook serialization of Tinker by Wen Spencer. Inventor girl genius Tinker lives in a near-future Pittsburgh, which now exists mostly in the land of the elves. She runs her salvage business, pays her taxes, and tries to keep the local ambient level of magic down with gadgets of her own design. When a pack of wargs chase an elven noble into her scrapyard, life as she knows it takes a serious detour. Tinker finds herself taking on the Elven Court, the NSA, the Elven Interdimensional Agency, technology smugglers, and a college-minded xenobiologist as she tries to stay focused on what's really important, her first date. Armed with an intelligence the size of a planet, steel-toed boots, and a junkyard dog attitude, Tinker is ready to kick butt to get her first kiss.
The power sink read empty, and the spell had collapsed. Windwolf was cool to the touch, and for a moment she was afraid he had died. She stared at him for what seemed to be eternity before he took a long, deep breath. During the day, Lane had kept drier, warm blankets on Windwolf. The current blanket was cool to the touch. Tinker called Lane. "The magic's out. Windwolf's cold. Is there anything I can do?" "Lie down beside him under the blankets with him." "What? Is he even conscious, Tinker?" "I don't know." Lane was right, though. Tinker was letting the memory of her dream make her self-conscious. A moment ago, she'd been afraid the elf was dead. How aware was he going to be of her? "Okay, I'll call you later. Let you know how we're doing." Tinker turned off the lights, took off her boots, and crawled onto the work table with Windwolf. Sometime during the day, his hair had come unbound. It spread into a pool of blackness on the table. To keep from pinning his hair under her, she gathered it into her good hand and carefully moved it all to his right side. It felt as silky as in her dream. She stroked the long, soft strands into order and then carefully cuddled up to Windwolf, trying not to press against any of his wounds. Lying in enforced idleness beside him, however, made her mind churn through possibilities at a feverish speed. Maybe, her brain suggested, she had dreamed so vividly of Windwolf because of the life debt coupled with his proximity. Possibly he had shared the memory. Perhaps he had actually instigated the sex, since it was beyond her normal ken of experience. She peered at his still face in the shifting beams of the passing headlights. Come on, Tinker. A male this beautiful and in this much pain doesn't dream about getting it on with scruffy little things like you. Which left her solely responsible. Wow.
That was another installment in Wen Spencer's Tinker, and that's it for the podcast. Thanks as always to Audible.com and podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. Praise, thanks, and gratitude to everybody who sat down with us about a year ago to talk about their books, and good night, Tony Daniel, wherever you are. This is David F. Shirod coming to you from a soundproof bunker somewhere deep in the heart of Texas. Join us here next week at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.